thumbs up. Can we turn this one off? Number two. Yes, please. And how about that? All right, I want to try one out with you guys this morning. I'll do it again in church, and then you'll laugh real loud the second time around. Boy, what a morning, huh? It's chilly out there, and it's chilly in here. Is it chillier in here? Yeah. Yes, it is one of the high holy festival days here at Mission Liberty Hill. It's Chili Cook-Off Day, which is exciting. You didn't come for that. You came to study Ecclesiastes with me. Am I right? Yeah, excellent. I have a feeling that we've got some folks who would normally be here earlier who are last minute. Yeah, getting that chili ready to go. So we've been working our way through the book. We've been walking our way through the book of Ecclesiastes. We are taking some time to acknowledge that everything under the sun has a cadence to it, has a rhythm to it. Things run in cycles. And there's not much you're going to do to change those cycles. Sun rises, sun sets. Rivers flow forever into the sea. The sea never gets full. All right? Man is born. Man grows up. Man dies. Hopefully you get to do all those steps. And hopefully, if you're lucky, there's a long time between those two things, but who knows? And who can do anything about it? Solomon is a man who asked God for wisdom before he became the king of Israel. And God said yes. And I have a feeling that maybe what happened to Solomon along the way was he misunderstood what God meant when he said yes. Because he spent his life knowing he was the wisest man and seeking out wisdom for everything under the sun. And he wound up being, ironically, the guy who got to build the temple for God and whose prayer of dedication at the beginning of that temple, I think of often. It's so good. He says things like, "Oh Lord, the heavens, even the highest heavens can't contain you. How much less this building that we've built? But yet, when your people come here and pray, hear their prayers. And when the foreigner from another land prays to this temple, hear their prayers." Right? I mean, it's so good. He gets it. And then, over the course of his life and career, as he gets, this doesn't happen to everybody, but when people get fabulously rich and fabulously famous, sometimes they get a little nutty, right? Like, think about early Elvis, think about late in life Elvis. Early Elvis, he's like wearing cool jeans, he's got a shirt, he's dancing. Scandalous, sure. Late in life, he's coming out in like a sequin jumpsuit, and he's like doing karate moves, and it doesn't look good, but he's doing it. If you're an Elvis fan, I'm sorry, but like, guy went through this thing, right? But like, was it that different for the Beatles? Like the Beatles, earlier in their career, they're all like suits and they got their little hair thing going on, and by the end, things got weird. I'm just saying. I don't know what the Eggman is, right? And this happens to a lot of celebrities. In fact, people love to hear those stories too. Y'all remember when Britney Spears shaved her head? That was like big news, right? And you can probably name, I bet you if you thought about it, you could probably name a dozen people that like early in their career, it's like cool, yes, they start getting rich, they start getting famous, they start getting crazy. I'm not saying that Solomon got crazy exactly, but I think he did suffer from a lot of those same things, that sort of detachment, the same sort of like perspective skew that happens. So that early in his career, Solomon is humble, asking God for wisdom. Late in his career, he's like, I've basically done everything. Now what? And he did what any sane man knows is a terrible idea. He married 700 women. Right? Don, this is an easy one. Is that a good idea?
One's enough.
One's enough. Most of us, I think, struggle to do a great job with one wife. This is your cue to lean over to your hubby and be like, yeah, but you're doing it. And those wives that he took were from various nations around the world with various religions. And instead of standing firm and saying, we have one true God and we are to worship him only, instead he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Oh, you need a shrine? Okay, I'll do. You need an idol? Okay, I'll help you out with that. And so he's like, after building the temple, he's building idols and places of worship for pagan gods. So, Solomon has this weird trajectory. And then when he gets toward the end of his life, which is when Ecclesiastes is written, seems like, he reflects back on it and goes, man, I kind of made a mess, didn't I? Better a young man who heeds instruction than an old king who doesn't. So this is a time when Solomon reflects back on things. He's realizing, he keeps saying things like vanity. It's all vanity. It's all folly. It's all chasing after the wind. Now, when he says it's all that, that's not a comprehensive statement, right? He's not saying everything is. It feels like everything is, because he's invested on all the things that are folly. Wealth is folly. Fame is folly. Wisdom is folly, even though it contrasts with folly. Long life. All that stuff, it doesn't amount to anything, because in the end, the rich man dies just like the poor man. The wise man dies just like the fool. Nothing under the sun matters. That's how he feels. And then occasionally in Ecclesiastes, you get these breaths of fresh air. When he doesn't feel hopeless and despairing, what is he doing in those moments that's breaking him through the gloom? He spends most of the book looking at what's under the sun. What does he do that breaks through his little gloominess? Is everything meaningless? Or does something have meaning? Is everything temporary, or is something eternal? Killing me, guys. Those moments of relief when he says, here's what I've noticed is the best thing for somebody to do. Here's where I know someone can find joy. All those times are when he stops looking down and he starts looking up. When he lifts his gaze to God. And then the hopelessness and despair, they vanish. And I think that's the big message of Ecclesiastes, is that you will not find satisfactory meaning for life if you don't lift your eyes to heaven. If all you look at is what this world has to offer, then all you will gain in the end is despair. Because everything you amass, you lose. Jesus says, don't store up your treasures on earth where thieves and where rust and moths destroy and thieves break in and steal, but rather store up for yourselves. Come on, say it with confidence. You're making me look bad on the internet. Come on. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where rust and moths don't destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Right? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Solomon spent a lifetime of amassing his treasures on earth. As he gets to the end of his life, he's like, well, now what do I do with it? I got to hand it off to one of my knucklehead sons. And who knows if they're going to do a good job with it. Does he actually hand his kingdom off to a knucklehead son? 2, that's right, the kingdom breaks in half. So it's actually worse than he imagined. But above it all is a king who is wise, and whose reign never ends, and whose kingdom is never broken. Right? All right. Last week, let me dig into the more detailed view of things. Yeah, last week we read about the importance of cultivating your relationships here on earth. There's a higher premium on people who love you than there is on how much wealth you can amass. We read that in verses 1 through 6. Remember the guy who was rich and had 100 kids, but nobody would bury him properly? Like, well, that's a sad story. Don't be that guy. We talked about how earthly riches will never really satisfy, and the good life is not in getting a little bit more. Joy isn't found in the stuff that you get. It's really learning to be content and satisfied with what you have already and receiving what you have as a gift from God. We read, the more words, the less the meaning. How does that profit anyone? Who knows what comes next? Before you die, who knows what's going to come after you're gone? Well, we said kind of everybody does, and nobody does, right? Nobody does in the details, but everybody does in the broad brushes, right? Because the world's going to keep going on. It'll look a little different, but if you know what you're looking at, people are still people, and that hasn't ever changed. That is, by the way, one of the reasons that a several thousand-year-old Bible will continue to be relevant for the rest of your life and for the rest of time. Right? And I'll talk about that in my sermon today, so a little preview for you there. We started in on chapter 7 a little bit, I believe. We said that a good name is better than perfume. I don't think we discussed that at all. So maybe we'll touch on that briefly. But we did talk about the day of death is better than the day of birth, and that it's better to mourn than to feast. And I kind of pushed back on that, right? Because didn't he also say there's a time for everything? And I think the wisdom in this is probably found in that most people who are mentally and emotionally healthy are going to prefer the feasting to the mourning. But you can't always go to the feasting. You got to mourn as well. And in fact, that mourning will put in perspective the feasting. Frustration is better than laughter. I mean, I'm not going to argue with you here, but all right. We got all the way through verse 6, I believe. So let's go down, starting at verse 7. What comes in the next few verses is kind of rapid fire wisdom. Little snippets. I think they are probably all related at a high thematic level, but I don't think they necessarily flow one into another in a tight narrative kind of way. And what's going to come in the next few verses is going to feel a lot like the book of Proverbs. Why might that be? Yeah, same author, right? Solomon wrote Proverbs. Oh, by the way, do you remember, I mentioned this last week, I think, but do you remember to whom Proverbs was written? It has an audience. It's written for his son. He wanted to hand down a book of wisdom so that his son could do a good job too. All right. Verse 7. Extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. You know, in 21st century United States of America culture, we really look down on bribes as being an immoral thing. We just know. It's part of our culture. That's not true all over the world. There are many places in the world where bribery is an expected part of just dealing with authorities. Go to the airport, you're going to get hassled. Go to the checkpoint, you're going to get hassled. You just got to grease his palm a little bit, and then you move on with life. Yeah. And this was probably true throughout much of history as well. And who does it really hurt? It's a little bit the same as, but it's not quite the same as something y'all probably are familiar with, which was the tax collectors in the New Testament. Y'all have heard this, I know, because you've read the story of Zacchaeus and Matthew and people like that, where it was an expected part of their job that they would fudge the numbers to make you pay more than you actually owe because they padded their own pockets with that. It's similar to that, right? But what Solomon's saying here is, well, let me ask you. Whose heart is corrupted by the bribe? Is it the person who's offering the bribe or the person receiving it?
Both, yeah.
Both. Because both know what's right and both agree that wealth is more important. You know? Like, who does it hurt for me to bend the rules? If, helps me, helps him, it's all good. It's all fine, right? But I thought this one was interesting. Extortion turns a wise person into a fool. How does extortion usually work? Yeah, extortion is some sort of a threat leveled against somebody else, usually secretly. Not always, but usually secretly. And they will not do whatever they're threatening if the person will pay for it. Well, how does extortion turn a wise person into a fool? I would not say that the one doing the extortion is the wise person in this situation, right? How does it turn a wise person into a fool? What's that? Okay, so on the one hand, it'll make the one who's paying, whatever that payment is, maybe it's just silence or maybe it's giving somebody a promotion or whatever. The threat doesn't really vanish though, right? And the thing about extortion is, as soon as you give into it, that person owns you. This is the way the mafia works, or did work. I don't know how the mafia works today, but historically, this is what would happen, right? You get threatened with something, and or do this for us. Pay protection money. Okay, sure, I'll pay it. Okay, I'll be back next month. Pay it again. I'll be back next month. Pay it again. The threat stays over your head. And I think in both of these cases, Solomon's saying, the thing to do is to be courageous and moral. And just take the consequences of that. Because it's better that than to be owned by somebody else. Or worse, to be owned by your own greed. Just do the hard moral thing.
The truth will set you free.
The truth will set you free. That's right. Very good, Clay. All right. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. When I first read the end of the thing is better than its beginning, that sounded like Solomon being dreary once again, but I don't think that's actually what's going on here. If you've ever done any sort of creative work, whether that's writing an essay, a dissertation, or what have you, whether that's building something, whether that's planting something, the rule that you'll sometimes hear people say is that the last 10% is the hardest. Or some people will even say the last 10% takes 90% of the effort. And I think that's true. I have many begun projects that never made it to completion. Maybe that's true for you, maybe not. But you know, the difference between, I've had a few million-dollar ideas for products. I'm not an inventor and I'm not an entrepreneur, but I've had a few million-dollar ideas for products. I'm not a millionaire. Why not? Yeah, I didn't see it through. What good is the idea if it doesn't exist? You got to make the thing. And if you make the thing, well and good, but then you got to get it into the hands of people who want to buy it. And if you get it in the hands of people who want to buy it, there's all those steps in the middle of finding a manufacturer and picking the materials, and there's so much stuff that you just don't realize. It's like, oh yeah, it's awesome. I had this idea. I drew the plans up. It's great. It would revolutionize the industry. Maybe. But can you bring it to completion? And you know, this is not so dissimilar from how Jesus talks about the faith too. You think about like the parable of the sower, where he's scattering the seed on the different kinds of ground. And there are some, it just doesn't, nothing happens. But there's a few where they sprout up, but they don't make it all the way to bearing fruit. And it's the ones that bear fruit that make the impact. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. So let's start with this. Is there ever a place for anger? Well, I wouldn't say that just because it's part of our biological inheritance, it's also good. Because I inherited some stuff from Adam that I don't want. Does anger fall into that category?
It's kind of hard. I know some people say, oh, it's okay, it's just a feeling. But you know, anger, because your value system is being compromised. Sometimes your value system might be wrong.
Did anybody ever live perfectly? Just Jesus. Was Jesus ever angry?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, when you think about Jesus' personality, if you're going to describe him, would you describe him as an angry person? No. When we read about what God's character is like, it says that he is slow to anger and abounding in love. But there are times that he is angry. So when we read a text like this, I do think it's important that we can separate the idea that anger is not necessarily sin, but quite frequently it is. The warning here is to not be quickly provoked. But I have noticed, and maybe you have too, that we live in a time of cultural outrage. It seems like there's always something that I'm going to use some air quotes here, that a moral person should be angry about. I've seen a bumper sticker. It's been a few years, but I saw this bumper sticker a little while back that said, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Someone I knew, and somebody I know and somebody I love, had a tattoo on their body that said rage with a period at the end. What's that about? Not so long ago, at a family gathering, I lost my temper. And I didn't feel good about it when it happened, and I definitely didn't feel good about it after the fact. Was I righteous in my cause? Maybe. Probably. Was I righteous in my response? Probably not. There is a place for anger, but it's not a go-to. So then why do we have a culture that is looking for outrage. There's a connection between anger and self-righteousness. I don't think you're hardly ever angry if you don't feel like you're in the right. If you feel like you're in the wrong, you're probably going to feel other feelings. What are some of the things you feel when you realize you're wrong? Guilt. Okay, good. What else? Regret. Yeah. Shame. Anger usually comes from feeling like we are in the right and we have been wronged. So, if someone speaks to you disrespectfully, they should speak to you respectfully. If someone slaps you across the cheek, I shouldn't be treated like that. If somebody honks at you because you didn't take off from the streetlight too fast, right? If somebody steals from you and you find out about it, if somebody's dishonest with you, I think anger is usually rooted, and this isn't exclusive, but I think often it's rooted in that feeling of I am in the right and I have been wronged, or I'm in the right and somebody is doing wrong. I don't think self-righteousness is very often the position of the wise. Right? The minute I start feeling self-righteous, I'm probably ignoring some pretty important things. Right? So Solomon's caution here is be careful. If you find that you're getting angry quick, you might actually be lacking a humility problem. And you would probably benefit from learning some patience with other people. Verse 10, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. We did discuss this a little bit a few weeks back, but let's just revisit it real quick. Were the old days better? Define better, he says.
Merle Haggard thinks so.
Well, who am I to argue with Merle Haggard? Consider for a moment the people of Israel enslaved in Egypt, and they cry out, and God hears their cry and sets them free and leads them out of Egypt and into the wilderness. And they're there for what feels like 15 minutes when you're reading the story. And they say, you know what, can we just go back? We used to have like nice vegetables and stuff. Oh, the good old days? When you were a slave? When you cried out to God for relief? But this is a facet of the human condition that we often edit our memories. We often will excise what was painful or difficult in the past. And doing that's usually kind of healthy, right? Because fixating on the pain of the past is definitely not healthy. There's another saying, I don't know who coined it, but it's something like this. Your current suffering is always the worst. Right? It's weird to me when a doctor is like, okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly does this hurt? I'm like, I don't know, compared to what? Compared to the worst thing you've ever felt. Well, I don't feel that right now. I feel this right now. It's hard for me to compare that, right? What he should do is like punch you in the nose and say, compared to that, how bad does your elbow hurt? To the doctor that I visit, don't do that, please. So oftentimes, I think, we focus on the problems that are currently here and don't really think so much about the problems that used to be here. Were the old times better than the good times? Maybe. I mean, there are some genuinely bad times. But what good does that question do? Why were the old times better why were the old days better? I don't know. You can't go back to the old days. What would be a better question somebody could ask? If they're unsatisfied with their day and time, what would be a better question to ask?
What do I need to change?
Yeah. What can I change? What should I change? What can I do better? How can I make today better? I'll give you a hint. It probably isn't go backwards. Backwards isn't really a good goal, right? Godly is a good goal. All right, let's keep going. I don't want to spend all my time on that. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. All right, easy question, easy answer. So shout it out. This is your chance. According to Solomon, which is better, wisdom or money?
Wisdom.
I said it's an easy one. Shout it out. Which one's better, wisdom or money? Wisdom. Thank you. In fact, this was all part of that story from when God talked to him at the beginning of his career. Well, you didn't ask for wealth, you asked for wisdom. You didn't ask for wealth or a long life. But because you asked for wisdom, I'll give you wealth and a long life. So Solomon's known this for a long time, from the very lips of God. But he has some rationale behind it now. Why is wisdom better than money? Would you rather be wise and poor or rich and foolish? Maybe rich and foolish for a day. That'd be kind of okay.
Wise and poor.
What's that?
Wise and poor.
Wise and poor. Yeah, but why?
Can't take wisdom away from you.
Okay, can't take wisdom away from you.
And wisdom can bring money or it can lose wealth.
They say a fool and his money are quickly parted, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't know is always true. But he has a rationale here. He says, wisdom preserves those who have it. I was thinking about this a little bit. Money has more instant influence, right? If somebody rolls into here you go. Somebody rolls into a banquet that a political candidate is holding, right? They're having one of those fundraising dinners. You would hope that the politician is going to listen to the wise in the room, but if somebody strokes him $1 million check, who's he going to listen to? I mean, that's the way that lobbying typically works. And that's why those fundraising dinners happen. I would say that money has a more instant and obvious influence. However, you got to be a shallow person for that to persist in influencing you. I mean, if you're surrounded by rich, horrible people, and you have any lick of self-respect and maturity, you're going to go find new friends. But let's take it a step farther. How many of y'all have seen Gilligan's Island? All right. Finally something that we all have seen. There's the skipper, Gilligan, There's a movie star. There's I don't remember how Marianne was summarized in the opening credits, but little country girl.
The professor and Mary.
The professor and Marianne, that's right. The millionaire and his wife. And so the millionaire and his wife have tons of money with them on the island. What good does it do? They wash their money and hang it up to dry. They can't spend it on anything. You know who's valuable on Gilligan's Island? Oh, the professor. The guy who can make a radio out of coconuts. Like that guy, that's who right? Because money's kind of an illusion. It only means anything if other people want it. Wisdom is applicable in every situation. Okay, let's keep going, because I think we can get a little farther. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. I think we talked about feeding kids their favorite foods maybe a week or two ago. And sometimes the message is, eat the vegetables. I know what you want is, whatever, another roll or whatever, right? Eat your vegetables, right? I gave you that whole plate. And the vegetables are good for you. The roll's not. I gave you all of it. If you'd like another this, maybe eat that and see if you're still hungry. They're always hungry, just so you know. But in teaching that lesson, I shared a maxim, a saying that I'm sure you've heard. You have to take the bitter with the sweet, right? Or maybe you've heard the version, you take the good with the bad. And I think it's rooted in Solomon's teaching here, which is good times are great. And when you're having them, enjoy them and be thankful for them. But when times are good, be happy. When times are bad, be sad. No, that's not actually what he says. When times are good, be happy. And when times are bad, consider this. What? You can cheat. Read it right out of the Bible. God gave you both. And here's what's interesting. Is God both good and bad? No, God is good. Just good. And so, if you have a good God and what you get are bad times, well, maybe there's a purpose in that too. You know what happens to people who don't go through hard times? What kind of character do you develop if you don't go through some hard times? Self-focused, yeah, possibly. Oftentimes they're not very resilient. There is a very popular podcast host who uses this phrase. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to make this a thing, but the phrase stuck with me when I heard it. He says, the worst thing you've ever been through is the worst thing you've ever been through. Right? And what he's saying there is that it's like the doctor's scale of pain. A scale of 1 to 10, how bad does this hurt? Well, I mean, if the worst you ever had was a scraped up knee, then maybe the scraped up elbow is 10 because it's the worst you've ever had. And you don't know any different, right? This is the worst I've ever had. Going through hard times helps to put things in perspective. We read in the New Testament that suffering produces character. Well, suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, right? So even those hard times can be received as a gift from God and can be even received with thanksgiving. That's hard, though. And if your perspective is only on what's under the sun, you will not have that. His solution to the problem of suffering is literally, when you're going through it, lift your eyes up to heaven and remember that a good God has brought you to this place and will carry you through this place. Let's keep going, because I think we can get through another section here. I don't want to be stuck in chapter 7 for too many weeks. We've been moving at such a good clip. All right. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these. The righteous perishing in their righteousness and the wicked living long in their wickedness. Do not be over-righteous, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Whoever fears God will avoid all extremes. Is there such thing as too much righteousness? If it turns into piety. What were you saying, Emmanuel?
It could, like, if you're depriving yourself of a lot of things.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. I would say, theologically, no. There is no such thing as too much righteousness. Jesus fulfilled all righteousness. And yet, there were plenty of people in his day who looked at him and thought they were more righteous. Why? Because they denied themselves things that he allowed himself. Look at this man. He eats and drinks. He's a drunkard and he wasn't a drunkard. He eats with sinners. Yeah, it's because he loves them. Oh, they're picking grain on the Sabbath. Yeah, it's because they're hungry. It's not a sin. Like, you misunderstand it. So, Solomon here is actually sort of coaching people to understand the way that Jesus lived. Jesus was perfectly righteous. But he wasn't trying hard to be more righteous than righteous. He was just being God's beloved son. He was just being righteous. And it was good. At the same time, you don't want to be licentious. You don't want to just be like lackadaisical about sin. That's not good either, right? Don't be over righteous. Don't be over wicked. Don't be over wise. Is there such thing as too much wisdom? No, but maybe yes, right? Because if what happens to you is what happens to Solomon, you start spiraling down a hole of just overthinking everything and not accepting the basic truths that God has to give. It may be becoming over-reliant on your own wisdom, and that's not good either. Don't be over-wise, but don't be foolish. Avoid extremes in all things. I believe it was Jesus who said, all things are good in moderation, right? This sounds simple, but actually, I think that the middle path is often the least simple one to walk. The simplest thing is to pick one thing, fixate it, and do that exactly. That's what the Pharisees did. They were like, the law, we will do every single point of the law, thereby being righteous. And Jesus is like, you have so fixated on what you think the law says, you've missed what the law says. And now all your righteousness is just making you grumpy and unrighteous. If you can just distill everything down to just one or two black and white statements and then base everything on that, it's a lot simpler. But you'll probably be insufferable and wrong a lot of the time. You may have noticed that the Christian life is kind of messy. Should you be friends with Christians or non-Christians? Both. Are those relationships the same? No. We should love and accept sinners. Yes. We should hate and reject sin. Yes. Well, what if the sinner identifies himself with their sin? Well, it's messy, right? But that's the call. Like, the call is to follow the way of righteousness, which is on neither extreme. All right. I'm probably at time, so we'll wrap it up there. We will pick up on verse 19 when we come back next week. Thank you so much. Stick around. We got church coming up here in a few minutes.